Okay, well, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining our online information session. This session is about the DPhil, the Doctor of Philosophy in Sustainable Urban Development. And the format is I'm going to give a short presentation and then answer any questions that have come up, people have added to the chat. And some of those questions will be answered in the chat, but some of them I'll answer at the end of the presentation. So I'm the course director for the DPhil, which has been running for nearly 10 years. And when you join this program, you're joining this community of scholars. We've got a range of research expertise, which you can explore on our website, but it's a community of scholars from students through to experienced faculty and external scholars and researchers. So sustainable urban development, I don't really need to tell people who've joined this session, is a critical field of importance, really one of the most important areas of study for global reasons. So I've been running, the whole program's been running for 13 years. There are two different courses. There is the DPhil in Sustainable Urban Development and the MSc in Sustainable Urban Development. Students have come on our course from over 60 different countries, and the global alumni network is now 300 members strong. It's a truly diverse group of students geographically all around the world, and from different disciplinary backgrounds. So the participation in this network really does give you global reach, and the networking value with your fellow students and with the scholars in the program is as important really as the study that you do in order to achieve your DPhil. So here's just a photo of one cohort. This is actually an MSc cohort. The MSc and the DPhil programs are part of the same Sustainable Urban Development program, and the two programs work groups of students work really very closely together. So here's a slide that shows sustainable urban development students from around the world, with the size of the dot representing the number of students who come from these different countries. In terms of professional backgrounds, most people have a built environment. Link covers architecture, urban planning, transport planning, landscape architecture. We've had students who are engineers, project managers, asset managers, as well as other design and real estate professionals such as lawyers, political scientists, economists. So really is a diverse range of students, both geographically and in terms of disciplinary backgrounds. And people who want to understand what SUD means, sustainable urban development, want to know how it will inform their own discipline and how they will improve their practice really through being part of the program. So who's the program for? I've mentioned the range of disciplinary backgrounds. I've mentioned the geographical range, but also different sectors. So we've had students, and we have students currently in the program from the public sector, from the private sector, from NGOs and non-profits, third sector organisations, and also from educational institutions. So we have other academics coming on the programme, and of course, as the programme is delivered, it's delivered by a range of different academics from across the University of Oxford. I'll show you a slide in a few minutes showing you the academics on the SUD programme. You should now see, which is about the DPhil in Sustainable Urban Development. So this is a part-time doctoral programme. Common question we get is, can I do it full-time? There's no full-time route. So the Sustainable Urban Development programme is in the Department for Continuing Education, which is about people coming back to study, people studying on a part-time basis. And the DPhil is an advanced research qualification. So it involves independent research and the writing of an original thesis. This part-time program has taken over 4 years. There's a maximum period of study of 8 years. And students on part-time DPhils at the University of Oxford typically take between 6 and 8 years. It's an intellectually vibrant community of inquisitive students. And another question we get quite commonly a lot of DPhil, what does DPhil mean? So DPhil is an abbreviation for Doctor of Philosophy. DPhil is exactly the same as PhD. So there's no difference whatsoever between the letters PhD, which is Latin for Doctor of Philosophy, and DPhil, which is an English abbreviation of Doctor of Philosophy. So yes, I've said it's an advanced research qualification, and it involves this independent study and the writing of an original thesis. The students need to be prepared to work independently. Students need to have a strong personal motivation. And when you make an application, it's assessed on the applicant's proven and potential academic excellence, as well as meeting the other published entry requirements, which are all published on the university website, which you need to look at before you make an application. So all students who are admitted to the programme at Oxford are interviewed. So interviews are held as part of the admissions process. And if you meet the admissions criteria and you present a promising research proposal, you will then get called to have an interview. The outcome of that interview, along with the application you've made, is what determines whether or not you're admitted to the programme. So we've got a number of different academics who can supervise DPhil students. There are 12 shown here, and these are a range of different research interests. You can look at the research interests, the expertise on our website. Students conduct their own research. That research is under the guidance of their academic supervisors, and those supervisors will advise you on all aspects of training, development, and academic progress. Every student being admitted to the programme now is going to be allocated for 2 supervisors, a primary supervisor and a secondary supervisor. But I think I just want to stress something. This is a piece of work that's being done, the DPhil is a piece of work that's being done by the student as a matter of independent research. So although you have a supervisor, the actual work of fulfilling the requirements for your DPhil is something that you need to do on your own as an independent scholar. And the process of registering for DPhil and going through to being awarded a doctorate is a research training that will allow you to develop your own skills as an independent scholar. So progression and assessment, a lot of these things we'll deal with in the questions if people have got questions about it, but when you're admitted to the DPhil programme, you're admitted initially as a probationary research student at PRS. And during this probationary period, students begin work on their thesis topic and start to develop their research skills through a range of training and skills development resources, including courses and including the doctoral study week, of which there are 3 each year held by the programme. Then, having passed the stage of probationary research student, you become a DPhil student. And at the end of the process, you need to fulfil a final assessment, the actual assessment for the DPhil. The Doctor of Philosophy is an academic thesis of around 100,000 words. And this is examined by 2 examiners. None of the examiners or assessors will be your supervisors. And if you're going to be successfully awarded a doctorate, you need to defend your thesis orally in front of these 2 appointed examiners. The attendance requirements for the programme are for all DPhils at the University of Oxford, part-time DPhils at the University of Oxford, you need to be in Oxford for 30 days in a year. And we have 3 doctoral training weeks, 1 in each term. And if you came to those 3 weeks and added a couple of days on either side, you could meet the 30-day residence rule. But that's not negotiable. It's not a distance learning DPhil. It's a talk, it's a DPhil that involves you attending the university for minimum 30 days in a year. And you will need to do that anyway to access some library resources, maybe to have meetings with your supervisor. You'll tend to have 1 or 2 supervisory meetings each term. And if you come to the doctoral study weeks, then one of those supervisions would take place during the study week. So that's actually what I want to say in the presentation. We've got plenty of time for questions which are asked in the chat. There are other resources available. So you will all probably have looked at the DSUD page. DSUD is DPhil in Sustainable Urban Development. You can get in touch by email, which some of you may already have done, and you can subscribe to the mailing list. And when you subscribe to that, you've got a choice of subscribing to the DSUD mailing list or the MSC, which is the MSUD mailing list. You could subscribe to both. So I'm going to switch off the presentation now. So a quick question. Can you let us know what are the kind of dissertation thesis themes that previous DPhil students have pursued? So there's a very wide range of themes being pursued and that have been pursued. We've currently got 30 students on the DPhil programme. So they're at different stages of their studies, from registering just last year to just coming up to the end when they're about to submit their thesis. Subjects cover a range of topics from placemaking and urban planning through to looking at smart cities and artificial intelligence, through to social aspects of sustainability. The key thing is that in all cases, students are carrying out research that is clearly linked to sustainable urban development. So it's got to have an urban theme, and it's got to have a sustainability theme. And that's important when you make your application, that you demonstrate that. Can the PhD research be done in any country in the world, in a particular region? So it's very common for people doing doctoral research to carry out their empirical work in a particular place. Could be country-based. It's more likely for our programme to be city-based or regionally based because of the urban nature of the programme. But yes, it's likely that your empirical research will be focused in a particular country, city or region. The question, if someone works in banking, how can you use knowledge of urban development? I think in assessing applications, one of the key things we're looking for is that students have a prior knowledge and experience of urban development. When we get applications from students who are very interested in doing the DPhil, but who haven't got prior experience either through their work or their qualifications of sustainability or urban development, then we might recommend that they do the MSc first of all. So on our programme at the moment, a number of students have come through the MSc having completed that, which gives them a very thorough grounding in sustainable urban development, both the theory and the practice. Then they apply for DPhil, and that's one of the possibilities. So when you make your application, you've got to explain and demonstrate why and how you've got experience of sustainable urban development. Now, there's a question about grades here. Let me read the question. I don't have top grades, but do have some sustainability work experience, but not much. What kinds of experience should I gain to increase the chance of getting it? So people who want to get involved in sustainable urban development, this is what I just said, but I'll repeat it, but who don't have sufficient experience either through their qualifications or through their work experience, the quickest way to deal with that is to go to and apply for the MSc in Sustainable Urban Development. Although many of the students on the MSc do have experience of urban sustainability, or they're coming from an urban sustainability background, We also admit students who don't, and it's a place where you can learn about sustainable urban development, which prepares you for the DPhil. DPhil is a very big commitment, 6 to 8 years, and you must have knowledge and understanding of sustainable urban development before you start. So I'm just looking through the questions. I know Amy's answering some of them, and I'm trying not to cross over with those. So entry for 2023 is closed. One of the participants is just asking if you can have late entry. So the entry to the programme, there are in Oxford what we call fields. There are potentially four fields of entry, 4 periods when you can enter. And there are closing dates which are published on the website. So, the next closing date I think is in December. Then there's a closing date in January. Sorry, my mistake, I think November, January, March. And if we've still got spaces, there's something called an open field. So you must apply within one of the fields for admission in October 2024. That's the next point you could be admitted to the DPhil. There's no further entry for this year. That closed, several months ago. So I think that's the answer to that one. Question: what sort of common characteristics do students share besides a passion for the topic and willingness to put in work? Well, characteristics for a successful student are such a wide range of different students. Part-time study places an additional burden on the student. It also has a big additional payback, because as well as achieving your qualification and as well as learning things as you go through the programme, you're carrying on with your professional work. But you're adding an extra piece into the vectors of your life. You've got your family, friends, you've got your work. And now if you do a part-time study over 6 to 8 years, you're adding in this study. So it is more challenging, and students do have to be very highly motivated, but it also gives them a higher payback. I don't think there are particular characteristics, apart from those that the questioner identified: passion for the topic, willing to put in the work, and of course you've got to have the academic ability. So at the University of Oxford, we are talking about and looking to admit people who show academic excellence. That will be one of the criteria that's used in judging your application. Experience is at some level a substitute for academic experience. So if you don't have absolutely stellar grades from your first degree, but you've got 12 years experience, that can compensate a little bit, but we have to be absolutely convinced that you've got the potential to fulfill the academic requirements of the programme. And strong academic performance is one of the things we really look for, evidence of strong academic potential. How vital is it that recommendations, these are the letters of reference letters, speak to sustainability bona fides? Well, it's not specifically critical that they speak to that, but the position is that if your overall application, including your references, don't give sufficient evidence of a knowledge of sustainability and urban development, not just sustainability and urban development, then you probably aren't right for this programme. And at the DPhil level, you do need this experience before you're admitted. The MSc level, there are some students who come because they want to learn about sustainable urban development, and they don't have to have previous specific experience. I think Amy answered the question. This next question: do students or graduates from the MSc have a better advantage? No, no one is given advantage based on having already been on the programme. There's no fast track for our MSc students. Look, I think Amy's asked the question about how to apply for the MSc. You find that the part-time nature I think this may have been answered. You find the part-time nature of the student's thesis research is different to full-time. So the requirements of the university for full-time and part-time study are identical. So whether you're doing the MSc or the DPhil, the standard you have to reach is exactly the same, not higher or lower for part-time students. I don't think the nature of the thesis is different. Part-time students do 6 to 8 years, full-time students do 2 to 4 years. Typically, a full-time student takes 3 or 4 years, so still a longish term study. I think what could be different is part-time students who are in employment may have different access to data, and that could change the nature of the thesis. But fundamentally, the requirements are the same, the assessment standards are the same, and I don't think if I had 5 theses in front of me, I would easily be able to say whether the student studied part-time or full-time. When the award is given, there's nothing that indicates that it was part-time or full-time. They're given the same standing as awards, and when you submit your dissertation, there's nothing that differentiates it. Let me see, I think, are there any specific funded research programs in the DPhil? So there are no specific funding opportunities because it's part-time. The funding is less easy to get in terms of standard research funding. There are a lot of different funding opportunities in the university. And if you want to apply for funding, which is harder, I'm going to say, for a part-time DPhil student, but it's still possible, you have to apply by the end of the January field. So all of the university's funding opportunities are based on people who apply in the first 2 fields, the December field or the January field. People apply in March or later are not eligible to apply for any university funding. Question, how many students does the department admit every year? Well, that varies. It varies mostly according to 2 questions which determine our limit. We've got to have the capacity to supervise a student's proposal. So if there's none of our supervisory team who could supervise your topic, then you can't be admitted to our programme. So that's capability to supervise, but we also have to have capacity. So if our supervisors are full in terms of the number of candidates they've got, that limits the number of people admitted. So the number of people admitted each year varies. I think we've had as many as 8 or 9 admitted in one year, and as few as 2 admitted in other years. It depends on the topics people come forward with and the availability of our supervisors. So you may have a topic that one of our supervisors can supervise. If that supervisor's already got 6 DPhil students, they can't take on any new students. So that's what determines how many people are admitted. And there's a question about 30 days a year, which is required. I think Amy's answered that. Yeah. So that is a requirement. That's not just something that's written in the regulations. Students who are enrolled on the DPhil part-time do need to meet what's called the residential requirement, 30 days in Oxford. And we do make that quite easy to fulfill. There are no age restrictions. There may be a lower limit. I actually don't know, but everybody who applies for the DPhil has already done an undergraduate degree. So there's already you've already reached a certain age. So I don't know if the university has a lower age limit, but there's no upper age limit. We have students from all age ranges. I'm going to say 25 to 60. It's not fixed like that. You could be admitted at 24 or younger if you've got sufficient experience of sustainable urban development. You could be retired and wanting to pursue it for your own personal reasons, and that's perfectly feasible to be admitted. Now, I don't necessarily. Does someone need a supervisor before applying for a scholarship? Well, different scholarships have different requirements. But if you're applying for a scholarship, you will probably have been admitted to the programme or offered a place on the programme. But in each case, you need to look at the individual scholarship requirements because each one's different and they're quite complicated. Do we have a backward limit since the last degree was obtained? No. Someone could obtain their degree 20 years ago and still come on the DPhil. They'd obviously have to show that they've got experience of sustainable urban development. So there's no gap that's required between getting your previous qualification and getting your new qualification, and enrolling and applying to be enrolled on the DPhil. Can do a joint degree, like a combination of this PhD and DPhil, I've said, are interchangeable, and the MBA. So we don't have joint program here at the moment. When somebody is on the DPhil, they're expected to be doing just the DPhil. The university has rules about people not registering for 2 award-bearing courses. I'm not talking about within the university, I'm talking about generally. So if you're still finishing one degree, you have to finish that before you enroll and are registered for the DPhil. And while you're doing the DPhil, you're not, the regulations of the university don't permit you to take another award-bearing qualification. And that's for the student's own good, because it's a great challenge to do DPhil part-time. So to add in another qualification decreases the chance of success. And the university is really dedicated to you having a successful journey from registering for a DPhil to becoming a doctor. Our resources are dedicated to helping you make that journey. Even though I've stressed, and I will repeat it, it is very much an individual journey. So, do you have any sorry, I'm just making sure I'm covering all the questions. Do both supervisors need to come from the 12 individuals mentioned in the presentation? They can be from the broader university setting. We have some examples of a second supervisor being not from the Sustainable Urban Development academic team. We start by looking for 2 supervisors from our own team. Then we would look for 2 supervisors, but this is rare. Normally everyone's from the team. Then we'd look for supervisors possibly from the Department for Continuing Education. And then possibly we'd look at supervisors outside our department within the University of Oxford. Can the 30 days be continuous? Within one term, yes, the 30 days can be continuous. People meet the 30 days in various different ways. I'm just going to mention again, we have 3 weeks, one each term, called doctoral study weeks. Those take place in Oxford, and if people and they're a requirement that students attend at least 2 of those. If you came to those, of course, you wouldn't fulfil the 30 days in one block. There'd be 2 different blocks. And they do help towards attaining the 30 days. So if people came to Oxford for 2 weeks, 1 doctoral study week plus an extra week, and later they come for 2 weeks, 1 doctoral study week plus an extra week, they would meet the 30 days. I'm seeing some of these answers are, some things I'm answering are already answered. Let's just have a look. There was a question about do you have any advice considering a topic? Would a topic which a student works on a daily basis be considered a good choice for a thesis topic? I mean, it's too, I can't answer that question very specifically. If you're working in a field that's germane to sustainable urban development, in that case, it's quite likely that your work will inform your research. And plenty of our part-time DPhil students, and all the students on this program are part-time, are doing research that is informed by their work or which stems from their work, even if it's a bit broader than the work they're doing. There's one, I think Sarah said, please answer 3 questions from a user here. Are prospective supervisors assigned or required? So the student can indicate preferable supervisors based on what they see of research interests, but the process of assigning a supervisor is part of the admissions process. If we don't have supervisors to supervise the project, we will not make you an offer. You won't be able to come on the DPhil. And although students can suggest who they think is suitable, that may not be how the actual allocation works. Second question here is, can licensed real estate professionals with certifications in technology and finance pursue an interdisciplinary research interest? Yes, you have to obviously convince the admissions panel that you are able to pursue an interdisciplinary research interest. But I mean, a licensed real estate professional is one discipline, technology is another discipline, finance is another discipline. So that person's already got interdisciplinary interests. And of course, based on that, they're able to put together an interdisciplinary research proposal. And then the third question, this one is, are research interests fixed or modifiable during the probationary research student phase? That's a really good question. And everyone has to come with a fully formed research proposal. You won't be admitted unless you make a research proposal that's credible and aligned to sustainable urban development. But it's quite common during that first stage for people to refine their proposal and in some cases to change their proposal. So people do find, as they get into looking at it in real depth as a student on the DPhil, they find either it's not researchable, or they find that they can't get the data, or they find that as they do a literature review, which is much broader, they find something that is more interesting to them. And yes, it's quite common and quite possible to change your original research proposal that was used for your admission to a different proposal. I don't think there are many DPhil students who end up doing the exact topic they put in when they first started, and that applies around the world. PhD students' proposals over 3 years of full-time study or 6 to 8 years of part-time study inevitably change. I think I'm coming to the end of these questions, but I may not be. So for the 30 minimum days, we count course activity. So yes, it's 30 days of residence in Oxford. That is the university requirement. So if you're following the doctoral training week, that is residence in Oxford. If you're in Oxford for 30 days, using the library, carrying out independent research, that's counted as 30 days. So there's no monitoring really of what you do during the 30 days. There's no attempt to monitor that. But this, as I say, is not a distance learning DPhil. It's a DPhil based in Oxford, although it's part-time, and you don't have to be resident in Oxford for the whole period. Are there possibilities to take courses in the university? So there's a lot of research support if you're a DPhil student in the university. There's the doctoral weeks, which we put on as a program, DSUB program. The graduate school of the Department for Continuing Education has a lot of research training. And throughout the university, there's a very significant support network for our DPhil students. DPhils are a big part of the university student population. These could be IT courses, they could be statistics courses, they could be research methods courses. So yes, there's a lot of support on academic writing and so on. So there's a question, I think is the penultimate one. Maybe the final one. We have a little bit more information regarding the doctoral weeks that you would participate on in Oxford. So the next doctoral week is for week 1 of Michaelmas term. This university is organised with 3 terms. Michaelmas term, Hilary term, and Trinity term. So our first doctoral week in the next academic year is week 1, and that covers a couple of days of induction training, which is for new students who are just starting. That induction is for all DPhil students in the department. And then we've got sessions given by our academics, the list of academics I put up in the presentation. 5 or 6 of those academics are giving sessions. I'm going to be giving a session, for example, on open data resources. This is secondary data. There's 2 types of data you can use for research, and you may use both. There's primary data, which is data that you've collected yourself. And there's secondary data, which is data that someone else has collected. It's perfectly legitimate to use secondary data for a DPhil or for any research. If you read published articles in refereed journals, many of them are based on research data sets that have been collected not by the researchers. Government statistics, for example, there are thousands of these sets, and it's growing all the time with the internet and with the advent of open data. So in the next doctoral training week, I'm going to be giving a session on using secondary data and on open data sets. There's another session being given by a colleague of mine, Patricia, on communicating the results of your research. There's another session being given by a couple of my colleagues, the team who I put up on the slides, which is on using mapping software within your research. So GIS software and other mapping software, which is very commonly used by DPhil students in one way or another in producing their research results. Hopefully that answers the question. Accommodation. Our accommodation is provided during the doctoral training week. So there's accommodation available in Oxford. It's not part of the program, it's not included in the fees for the course. The fees for the course cover your registration with the university. They cover your college membership, because at the University of Oxford, all students on award-bearing courses are matriculated students, and that means you're a member of a college. So when you apply, you'll be admitted to the university, you'll be a member of the Department for Continuing Education, you'll also be a member of a college. And colleges also have accommodation, but the university fees cover your college fees and your university fees. They don't cover accommodation. So there is accommodation available. The department has, within Rewley House, we've got some very good accommodation for students studying in Oxford on a day-to-day and week-to-week basis. Many colleges have accommodation. So there's accommodation available, but it's not part of the residential week. There's no additional fee for the residential week. That's included in your overall fee, but it doesn't include accommodation. Question about how long it takes: minimum 4 years, maximum 8 years. Does this suggest anything to do with progress? I mean, clearly it does. If you finished in 4 years, you have made good progress and fast progress. If you finish in 8 years, it doesn't mean you've been slow. It means you've worked to the maximum time scale. My experience is this: I haven't met a single student who started a PhD, full-time or part-time, who didn't tell me, I'm going to do it quickly, I'm going to do it in 2 years part-time, I'm going to do it in 4 years, 2 years full-time, I'm going to do it in 4 years part-time, because that's the ambition we all have when we start. But I also haven't met a single student on a part-time program who did it in 4 years. So the reality of life, the reason the university has these time periods is because 800 years of experience has taught us that it takes this long to do a DPhil part-time. So typically our students and DPhil students part-time in the university take 6 to 8 years to complete the DPhil. If you make very good progress and everything slots into place, you don't have any of the events of life that can sometimes intervene, which slow you down, then you may be able to do it in 4 years. I think that answers all the questions. I don't know if Amy or Sarah want to draw my attention to any that I've missed. But based on that, I'm planning to call the session to an end. There's another question just popped up. Let me have a look at that. Is the course generally open to all forms of studies? Is there a certain expectation of research study design? Would it be appropriate to work on an observational study, or an interventional or causality-based study? So there's no expectation of what kind of research you're going to do. So taking it at its highest level, there's lots of different ways to classify this. It's a good question that you're asking. So there's no requirement for it to be a qualitative study or a quantitative study. It could be either. It could be mixed methods. It could be both. There's no requirement for it to be interview-based or survey-based. There's no requirement for you to collect primary data. You could use secondary data, but most DPhil students do collect their own primary data, which may be supplemented by secondary data that's already been collected by someone else. So there's no prescription. The piece of advice I would generally give is if you can carry out some empirical analysis of data, that is a much more straightforward way to get a DPhil than a study which doesn't involve empirical work. But yeah, there's no prescription. And the university regulations don't have a prescription. Most of these questions are being answered. There's two here that I'll try and answer. I don't think have been answered. Is there a percentage of people who don't finish the course after a number of years? I don't have statistics for that. There's a very small number that I know have withdrawn. And often that's because of other circumstances, family circumstances, health reasons. You may be a carer. There's lots of reasons why people don't complete a degree, let alone an 8-year maximum part-time degree. But we don't have a particularly high rate of people dropping out. And DPhil study generally, there's a relatively high dropout rate because it's a challenging exercise and it takes a long time, and the chances of your life circumstances changing during that time can be quite high. So I'm already teaching at university in USA. Would that be of help? It could be. There's no preference given to academics who come on the program. We have academics, people who are teaching and researching elsewhere who are admitted and successfully go through the program. That applies to the MSc in Sustainable Development as well. So it in some ways it's a help because obviously you understand the academic world, but it's not. It doesn't give a particular advantage over students who are working in practice. So I think there's a question that's been answered here by Amy about do we take courses or is it just research? So in the United Kingdom, the format of a PhD, a doctoral program, tends to be based on a period of independent study and research followed by a dissertation, which you submit at the end. That applies to full-time and part-time, and that applies at this university. So unlike the United States model, where you may have 2 years of taught courses with exams, and then you have 2 years to do a dissertation, which is a smaller, lighter weight research study, that's not how the UK model works. So there are no courses that are prescribed for a year or two, and then you start research. You start the program doing your research. And there are plenty of courses that students take. I don't know any students who do the DPhil without taking research methods course, interviewing course, statistical analysis course. Whatever skills they want to bolster up, they may go on courses, but they're not a prescribed part of the program. And during your meetings with your supervisor, one of the things we do is what's called a training needs assessment. We try and assess the gaps in your research skills and recommend courses for you to do. But they're not a prescribed part of the program. So I hope that answers that question, a little bit more clearly. I think we've answered the question, can you reapply? Which you can. The recording is going to be shared. Question, why is there a 1 month residency requirement? So The university requirement for part-time DPhil students requires 30 days residency in Oxford. One of the reasons for that is because the university doesn't offer we don't do distance learning for this programme, or actually for many programmes. The most characteristic feature of studying at Oxford is Oxford, the geography of the place. So it's one of the requirements of the university that you're here for 30 days. The question isn't why, the question isn't do we need it? That's not relevant. That is one of the requirements for this DPhil and for all other part-time DPhils at university. And if there are students who can't do that, that means they're applying to the wrong course. Because there are plenty of doctoral programs that don't have any attendance requirement, but not at this university. So I think I've answered the same as Amy. I think Amy's answered that as well. So there's no requirement to attend a minimum number of training modules, but most students will want to enhance their skills. Can you have a gap in the middle of the studies? I'm going to perhaps leave that to Amy to answer, but some students do suspend their studies, and there is a provision for suspension of study, which is probably what you're talking about in a gap. Right, I'm going to answer the last question. So even if people type more questions, I'm not going to answer them. There's a question here. Are supervisors open to prospective students reaching out before applying? So this is explained on the website, and people are free to contact me as the course director with their ideas for their DPhil, and I will review them. I'm happy to have a short meeting with anyone, meaning a phone call on Teams or Zoom, to discuss their ideas. I'm happy, if it's appropriate, to talk about possible supervisors and possibly to put you in touch with a supervisor. So I would say you're discouraged from contacting supervisors directly because they don't have the resources to deal with that. My job as course director is to help people who are wanting to apply. So contact me in the first instance if you want to, before you apply. You don't need to do that. And I will be able to guide you, including maybe saying this isn't something we could help with, or saying this looks interesting and we've got supervisors who can help. So I think that's the answer to that question. You've got to read the website. It's been answered in the chat by Amy. You've got to read the admissions criteria. If you did need to have a short chat to me, that's one of the possibilities. It's a very popular course. I am not joking if I tell you I get a dozen inquiries each week from possible students. So that's why we don't want those to be taking up the time of the supervisors. We're already very busy. So I act as a filter, if you like. You can also email the postgraduate research team, who will almost invariably put it through to me if it's got an academic element to the inquiry. If you've got administrative questions, the postgraduate research team can answer. So the emails on the website and the emails at the end of this presentation, which is going to be recorded, which is recorded and will be posted and made available to everyone. So I think we're at the end of the session. I hope it's been helpful. Thank you everyone for your interest in the programme. It obviously depends on the vibrance of the student population, and you are the group who will be the next student population. So we welcome people coming to these sessions, and I welcome people inquiring with me to see whether it's suitable for them. It's not suitable for everyone for various reasons, but I can give guidance and help on that. Okay, thank you all very much.